evening, everyone. I am your host here to give brief remarks for the evening. I am Dr. Catherine Smith, the Director of Culture, also a proud descendant of the Long Look Free people. Welcome to our commemorative lecture panel discussion. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Honorable Dr. Carl Dawson, Deputy Speaker and Representative for the 1st District, the Junior Minister for Culture and Tourism, Honorable Luce Hard Smith, and Representative for the 4th District. And I understand that we have a special guest this evening with us from the Bahamas, Honorable Frederick Mitchell, Foreign Minister from the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Welcome. We're going to go right into our lecture panel discussion, and at this time, I would like to introduce and bring to the stage our moderator for the evening, Mr. Troy Christopher.
Good evening, everyone. This is a special evening. We're going to be going a little deeper into the long look. That has become a special word now. The long look free people. And we have right here on my right, Mr. Ron Potter. He's going to be presenting the history of Long Look Revisited. And we also have Miss Bernadine Louis Walters. Bernadine Louis right now. And she is doing a Long Look community. It's a rich political leadership. Long Look community, a rich in political leadership. And then we're going to have Miss Kathy Smith, who is going to be taking the angle of Long Look as a cultural landscape. So with no further ado, we're going to start our presentation. And we're going to start with Mr. Ron Potter. Ron Potter is a Virgin Islander. He is the son of Lanzel and Loretta Potter. He was born in Greenland, Tortola. He did his primary schooling at Long Look Primary. It's now Francis Lettsam. Also at the Eastern Primary School. It's now called the Willard Whitley Primary School. And the BVI High School, now called Elmo Stoutt. Ron is a certified chartered accountant with a degree from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, Barbados, and a professional qualified from the Association of Chartered Accountants of the United Kingdom. He has over 30 years experience in auditing, accounting, consulting, and is currently the Managing Director of BDO Limited, the largest auditing, accounting, and consulting firm in the BVI. Ron is an avid genealogist with a keen interest in researching various family lines of the Virgin Islands. He is a proud descendant of many Virgin Islands ancestral communities, including Long Look, Kingston, Eastern, Salt Island, Peter Island, Cotin Bay, Jennings Hill, Virgin Gorda, and Anegada. In addition, Ron is also a keen researcher of the history of Long Look. Ron has served as chairman of various statutory bodies and has also served as chairman of 78th Heritage Society since 2017. Ron is married to Nadine Maduro and has one daughter, Skylar. We now welcome Mr. Ron Potter.
Thank you, Master of Ceremony, Dr. Smith, and thank you, Moderator Troy. Following the protocol that's already established, Good evening to everyone, and happy 250th anniversary to the free people of Long Look and their descendants. And so I've been tasked this evening with presenting a history of Long Look revisited. In 1713, William Middleton, a ship's captain from Ireland, was given a grant for a plot of land in Tortola called Long Look. At that time, it was one word, on which he started a cotton plantation. Long Look was subsequently inherited by his daughter Mary, who operated a cotton estate with her first husband, John Hunt, a lieutenant governor. After John Hunt's death, Mary took the Long Look estate and the enslaved persons on that estate into her marriage with Samuel Nottingham, a Quaker missionary, in 1748. In 1754, they migrated to New York so Samuel could continue his missionary work, leaving the Long Look estate in the care of Mary's sister, Tabitha Maddox. In 1776, the Nottinghams prepared a conveyance to manumit the 25 enslaved persons on the payment of £5. And subsequently, in 1782, the Nottingham gave the free people the 50-acre estate called Long Look, which they previously had worked on as the means to sustain themselves and to build a community. Please note, in 1776, the free people got their freedom, but they only got the estate, Long Look, in 1782, 6 years later. There were other free communities in the Virgin Islands during the colonial era. However, those communities did not last, but Long Look did, and it has become the oldest continuous Black community in the Virgin Islands. The village of Long Look that emerged out of the Long Look estate has had over 200 plus years of rich and remarkable heritage, and it has represented the different things to various people. And I start first with the free people of Long Look themselves. And I note that it was an act of manumission, it was an act of self-manumission, versus manumission. And the reason why I say that is that the free people of Long Look were not given their freedom, which is manumission. It was an act of self-manumission where the enslaved persons secured their own freedom by the payment of £5, which was paid in advance of the receipt of the manumission. Payment in advance indicates that the free people entered into negotiations with Samuel and Mary Nottingham, and one of the terms that was agreed in order to secure their freedom was £5. And if I can quickly read an extract of the manumission document, where Samuel Nottingham says, "I conclude it is necessary for me to grant the said and the N-word their natural rights of freedom, and accordingly, I have granted by these presents in consideration of £5 sterling to me by the said N-word, paid at and before the sealing of this instrument." So our ancestors bought their freedom. How were our ancestors able to buy their freedom? First and foremost, they were free. They were literate. They could read and write, or at least George Nottingham could. In the 1782 letter in which the Nottinghams granted the free people the estate, Samuel and Mary were responding to a letter written by George to them in the first place. And the letter starts, "Dear George, thy letter of 8 of last 6 months we received." And in that letter, George updated them on the status of the free people, and this is in 1782 now, including the deaths of 2 individuals. This information about George indicates that the free people were not at a disadvantage, great or otherwise, during their negotiations. In addition, the free people were prepared, as they paid £5 negotiated with Samuel Nottingham in advance. Well, how did they get £5? Long Look was a cotton plantation, and the cotton planting season was from September to December, compared to February to April for the planting season for sugar. So the free people, or the soon-to-be free people, would have come to agreement with Tabitha Maddox, who was the manager at that time, to hire themselves out to work on the nearby sugar plantations to help with their subsistence and also earn extra money. In addition, provision grounds were important for their subsistence, and the free people would have sold the excess produce from these grounds to earn money. From these activities, they would have earned enough money to reclaim their freedom when the opportunity presented themselves. The above points illustrate the resilience and determination of these enslaved persons to secure their freedom through various means, including financial payments and legal negotiations. The free people were active participants in their own freedom. Once the estate was given to them, the free people started a process of community development, transitioning the Long Look estate into the Long Look village. And in the early stages, they operated Long Look as a village cooperative where they collectively owned the land and made collective decisions for all of their collective economic, social, and cultural benefits. In our 1840 report from a visiting Quaker missionary, he stated, while many of the plantations in that part of Tortola had long been abandoned and overgrown, this estate was still producing a comfortable subsistence to a happy community. Long Look was a free black community surrounded by enslaved plantations. So with the land and the resolve, the free people not only survived, but thrived in the face of a hostile environment. Long Look was free to choose his own destiny and plot his own course. It had become a beacon of hope and attracted both enslaved and free persons who wanted to come to Long Look to have a better life. These new residents brought new skills such as boat building, sailing, and teaching, which further developed the village. The free people, our ancestors, understood that they had to build a community in a world that was hostile to them, but build it they did, and within the rules and norms of that society. They could read and write, and they established 2 schools in the village. They were churchgoers, despite having to travel to East End. And in an 1822 report, it was noted that they were not vaccinated for smallpox, but they were a fine, healthy race of people. They were resilient in the face of natural disasters such as hurricanes and drought, and in some cases where they got little pay for their labor, they were able to support themselves and even acquire additional property. Our ancestors had good houses and were hardworking and free of debt. They developed business management and financial stewardship skills before they got the freedom, as they had earned enough money, the £5, to reclaim their freedom when the opportunity presented itself. When they were granted the estate in 1782, they were able to continue cotton operations until the early 1820s, over 40 years, that's 2 generations, until the price of cotton fell too low and they switched to provisions and livestock. Long Look became an economic hub, and it was a home to boat builders, ship owners, artisans, and later small community shops. That's the free people. I also now want to touch on some of the understandings that we have about Long Look, and hopefully provide some insights on this. And on this particular topic, I ask that I am not lynched, hung, drawn, or quartered for the comments that I make here. The first free slaves in the Western Hemisphere. So this seems to stem from the work of a doctoral student, Frank McGlynn, who completed his dissertation, Marginality and Flux, an Afro-Caribbean Community Through 2 Centuries. The dissertation focused on the village of Long Look, Tortola, and in it he made a statement. It appears that the village of Long Look is the oldest Afro-American community extant in the English-speaking sector of the Western Hemisphere. And in his dissertation is page 4 and 12. Using the definition of extant, this means the oldest community of people of African descent in the English-speaking Western Hemisphere that still survives. But this has been interpreted to mean that the free people of Long Look were the first free slaves in the entire Western Hemisphere. And I will simply say today there are documented cases of earlier free African communities, such as the self-liberated community of runaway enslaved Africans who established the village of San Basilio de Palenque in Colombia around 1570, 1580. It's also taken to mean the first free slaves in the English-speaking Western Hemisphere. And I would say there are documented cases of earlier communities, such as the free black communities of the Maroons of Jamaica, which emerged during the Spanish rule and continued under British rule after they invaded in 1655. It's also taken to mean the first group of slaves in the Virgin Islands, free slaves in the Virgin Islands. In the Virgin Islands, John Coakley let someone inheriting his father's estate in Little Yosondike, freed his enslaved persons in 1767, but he did not give them the estate, and soon afterwards they dispersed within the communities on Tortola. Long Look is one of the earliest communities of free people in the Virgin Islands, because it did not have the first free slave or was not the first free plantation. This does not diminish its importance in history and the heritage of the Virgin Islands or worldwide. A small community of free black people on a estate surrounded by enslaved plantations, which was hostile to its existence but survived and even thrived at times from 782 to 1838, tells a very powerful story. In the following years, as we all know, Long Look has taken up its rightful place in the Virgin Islands. My next section is Long Look versus Nottingham Estate. What is the name of the estate which the free people worked when they were enslaved and ultimately inherited? So like I made mention, in 1713, William Middleton was given a land grant in Tortola called Long Look, one word. And this is the estate that he passed on to his daughter, Mary Hunt, who ultimately took it into marriage with Samuel Nottingham. That's in 1713. In 1789, Hannah Abbott, who was Samuel Nottingham's sister and the executor of his estate, after he had died in 1787, had to reissue another deed to convey and to confirm to the free people a plantation called Long Look, one word. In December 1822, John Dugan, a colonial officer, made a report on the free people whom he met and subsequently visited them at their estate. In that report, he noted they reside on the plantation called Long Look. At that time, he moved to two words. Later in the report, he states, I visited their plantation Long Look, two words, twice. Daniel Fraser, a colonial resident of the Virgin Islands, in an 1823 report, said, where he noted, Samuel Nottingham gave 25 persons their freedom with 55 acres of land in Fat Hawks Bay, named Long Look, two words. So when did the Nottingham name come into popular use? In my research, my genealogical research, I have looked at thousands of birth, death, and marriage records from 1819 onwards and seen the Nottingham estate or the Nottingham village names mentioned less than 10 times versus thousands of times for Long Look. It seems that Long Look the Nottingham estate name came into popular use when the free people were granted the land in 1782, and over the years, the estate transitioned to the village. The boundaries of the Long Look village expanded beyond that of the original Long Look estate. However, the descendants of the free people understood that the original estate land was held in common. They built homes sporadically over the property, but without property deeds. So with the introduction of the Virgin Islands National Bank in May 1961 and Barclays in 1965, financing became available to construct homes. But in the case of land held in common, the people of Long Look could not obtain financing. And so to address this, the Honorable TB led some lobby for the Long Look Lands Commission in 1968 to distribute titles of the original estate to the people of Long Look. And to distinguish the original estate from the rest of the village, it was referred to as Nottingham Estate. And in the current day, it appears that the upper portion of the original estate is the only part that is being referred to as the Nottingham Estate, not the whole thing. So I would say Long Look was called Long Look before Samuel Nottingham was involved. It was called Long Look while Samuel Nottingham was involved. And it was called Long Look after Samuel Nottingham had died. I want to touch on Christopher Fleming and what we know about Christopher Fleming. The free village of Long Look, surrounded by enslaved plantations, developed an attitude that became known as the courage and spirit of a Long Lookian. And the story of Christopher Fleming and the Fair Knot is a powerful example of this attitude, where a group of men from Long Look challenged a decision by the government of the day to seize Long Look ship that was laden with goods for the hardworking people of the community. But who was Christopher Fleming? He was born in Long Look in 1852 to John Fleming and Sarah Gordon Fleming. His mother Sarah was one of the Gordon siblings, a prominent family member, a family of the day. His father was a shipwright who moved from another part of Tortola. He was his mother's only child and apparently represented her in family matters even from a young age. In 1871, he, along with his uncles Jacob Gordon and John Lettsom, the two most prominent individuals of the day, bought 80 acres in Paraquita Bay from Goodluck and Angela Cunningham. He was married twice, had 6 children, including Miss Dina Chris Thomas. Fleming was a ship captain, regarded by his crew as hard but fair taskmaster. He had a relatively high degree of learning and enjoyed posing word contests and spelling games with his associate. He was a tough fighter who was quick with his fists. Fleming was the class leader and the head of the men's fellowship in the Methodist Church, and it was reputed that meetings did not start until he arrived and sat down in his chair that was reserved for him. He was known as the mayor of Long Look, and he marched at the head of the annual Easter parade, and he owned a sizable gun collection. In 1819, Fleming led a group of men from Long Look who challenged a decision by the government of the day to seize a Long Look boat, the Fair Knot, that was laden with goods for the hard-working people of the community on the charge of contraband smuggling. The usual remedy for contraband smuggling was, the contraband was estimated to be 20 pounds out of 5,000 pound cargo, was to impose a fine, but the president wanted to make an example. He decided to seize the whole boat, but the men from Long Look marched down to Rotown with arms to demand the return of the boat, and the president, on hearing that a group of armed men were approaching, fled to the then Danish island of St. Thomas for assistance. Due to the insurrection in Tortola, a Danish warship sailed to Tortola, later replaced by a British warship from Antigua, and captured Fleming and his comrades. Fleming and comrades were sent to Antigua on trial for trial on charges of rioting, and after 2 days of trial, 12 men, including Fleming, were convicted of the minor charge of unlawful assembly, and 1 man was acquitted. Fleming's comrades were the leading men of the day in Long Look, and Christopher Fleming was the leader of those leaders. And I'll quickly run through the names of those individuals: John Christopher Fleming, Alexander Nelson Dawson, John Peter Sonny Thomas, William Lettsom, James Peter Tunzi Gordon, John Abraham Rapsat, Joseph Boss Joe Skelton, Charles Edwin George, Tommy Andrew Pickering, James Boodoo Thomas, Frederick Augusta Thomas, James Bim Thomas, and Joseph Todman. He was the one that was acquitted. Fleming was in prison for 6 months. Everybody was for 4 months or less. Fleming and comrades are still considered local heroes in Long Look and the Virgin Islands community, because they felt that they sent a strong message on heavy-handed government. I want to touch on the women of Long Look. When Long Look and its heritage are being discussed, the individuals most associated with it is Samuel Nottingham, the Quaker missionary who married into the Middleton family that owned and operated the estate since 1713. However, it should be noted that the rich heritage of Long Look was developed by a series of women, both enslaver and enslaved, without whom the estate and the village of Long Look would not have lasted over the last 313 years, including the time it was an estate. In both cases, the women entered into marriages or partnerships on an equal or greater financial standing, but their assets in later reporting are attributed mainly or solely to the husbands or partners, which then displaces the women's contribution. It is understood that the men contributed to the development of Long Look, whether economically, socially, or culturally, but so did the women, and in some cases even more so. And the men were attracted to Long Look in the first place due to the availability of these potential mates, the interest those women had in the Long Look estate generally, and specifically in any individual assets that they may have owned. The usual story I tell is the story of Diana Nottingham and her husband, Geoffrey Pickering, who was an enslaved person on another estate. His enslaver, Isaac Pickering, was going to ship him to one of his other plantations in Trinidad. He didn't want to leave his family, so they devised a plan where Diana bought him through a third-person intermediary and immediately set him free. So some advice to our men: please love your women, because you never know when they have to buy you and set you free. In 1824, it was reported that Eve and Diana, two of the Long Look free people and two of the original 25, and Eve's daughter Mary Rapsat owned kobolds, which are boats, which their husbands Jasper Rapsat, Geoffrey Pickering, and Abraham Vanderpool used for sailing and inter-island trading in St. Thomas. Jasper and Geoffrey cultivated provision grounds on the portions of the estate used by their wives. Even in the cases where it was the women who migrated to Long Look, such as Grace Fred, a free woman from Spanish Town, she brought a 23-foot boat, 5 acres of land, and a house in Spanish Town into her marriage with Geoffrey Pickering. Just as importantly, she brought teaching skills to the village and operated a school. It also should be noted of the 16 adults of the 25 free people who bought their freedom, 10 were women who would have contributed to the £5 paid to reclaim their freedom. And based on currently available records, it is only the descendants of these 5 women, Margaret, Belinda, Dora, Eve, and Diana, that can be traced to the current generations. We would not be celebrating 250 years of this act of self-manumission by the free people of Long Look without the contribution of these women. It is from these women we get the genealogy that connects the past to the present. These are the women who gave us Long Look. So we must not let the stories of these women be lost to time, and we cannot let the contribution of these women be diminished. Nothing good can come out of Long Look. Long Look over the centuries has unfortunately attracted descriptions such as injurious to our interests, and nothing good can come out from Long Look. However, when the heritage and the lens from which Long Look is viewed, it tells from a different angle, it tells a different story. And I will address this by looking at 2 areas within our communities: politics and sports. The free people and the early immigrants into Long Look left a legacy of leadership as their ancestors to many current and former politicians. And I ask you to put aside your personal biases and political allegiances as I list the following names: Alred Fred, Alvaro Maduro Keynes, Andre Penn, Calvin Malone, Conrad Maduro, Dancia Pinn, Dolores Letsom Christopher, Eileene Parsons, Hubert O'Neill, Kedrick Pickering, Leslie Malone, Lloyd Black, Luz Hodge Smith, Marlon Penn, Natalia Wheatley, Neville Smith, Omar Hodge, Yolanda Smith, Ronnie Skelton, Terrence Letsom, Vernon Malone, and Walwyn Bruley. And over in the neighboring U.S. Virgin Islands, we have Alicia Chucky Hansen, who's passed, and Charles Wesley Turnbull, who's also passed as well. These are all the current and former politicians who have a long look ancestry. And then I will add in the area of sports, do you know that our regional champions, Dion Crabb and Tahisha Harrigan Scott, are long look descendants? And in addition, our Olympic finalists, Kyron McMaster and Chantal Malone, are also descendants of the Long Look Free people. So if the people who represent the Virgin Islands on a world stage have a Long Look ancestry, how could that comment, nothing good can come out of Long Look, apply? In conclusion to that matter, Long Look, whether as an estate or village, has been in existence for over 300 years, and in its various stages, Long Look has contributed to the good of the heritage of the Virgin Islands. My last section, Samuel Nottingham beyond the grave. If you have deduced that I have taken a very dim view of Samuel Nottingham, you would be correct. There was a 1776 Quaker edict issued by the Quaker governing body which required all Quakers to manumit their enslaved persons and compensate them. But Samuel Nottingham had our ancestors pay him for the rights that he himself claimed were theirs in the first place. And then Samuel Nottingham later granted the estate to the free people in 1782, but the estate wasn't his in the first place. It belonged to his wife Mary. And then he has been held in this referential view that he freed our ancestors due to his Quaker belief and the goodness of his heart. I'll leave that up to your assessment. My dim view of Samuel Nottingham was held up until 3 weeks ago, until I read his will. Samuel Nottingham died in 1787, and his executors were his sister Hannah Abbott and Henry Gandy, an abolitionist, and conveyancer from Bristol. In his will, he leaves his plantation in Hawke's Bay, Tortola, to his sister Hannah. So why would Samuel leave Long Look to Hannah if he had already gifted it to the free people? Well, the 1782 grant of the estate was not recognized by the planter community here in Tortola. And in addition, the 1776 deed of manumission registered on Tortola on July the 15th, 1784 was also challenged. Thus, Samuel Nottingham brought in a specialist in land matters in Henry Gandy, and Hannah issued another deed to give validity to the 1776 deed and to convey and confirm to the free people a plantation called Long Look. This deed was dated October the 3rd, 1789, and was registered in Tortola on June 16th, 1790. I could only assume that this is what Samuel had agreed with Hannah before his passing, and Samuel Nottingham, in my view, finally made right by the free people. So the land that we thought we had in hand from 1782 was only recognized by the planter community here in Tortola on June the 16th, 1719. And the freedom that we thought we had bought in 1776 was only recognized by the planter community on June the 16th, 1719. Through this deed issued by his sister, Samuel Nottingham reached from beyond the grave to ensure that we are, and we continue to be Long Look. In closing, the Long Look story is one of endurance, achievement, and hope. Our ancestors laid the foundation for a community that would endure for generations and whose descendants would help shape the political, economic, cultural, and spiritual development of these Virgin Islands. The story of Long Look and the free people reflect the broader narrative of the Virgin Islands, from colonial plantation society to a modern Caribbean territory with a strong cultural identity. And as we honor 250 years of heritage, let us look towards the future with confidence and purpose. Again, happy 250th anniversary to the free people of Long Look and the descendants. Thank you.
Mr. Ron Potter, ladies and gentlemen, give him another round of applause. Tremendous amount of research. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our Honorable Premier who is joining us now. But I want to also ask you guys to make your notes where this session is about you guys, and basically apart from the lectures that are being presented, we're hoping to get quite a bit of questions. We're going to go through the next two lecturers first, and then the questions will start to arrive. Miss Bernadine Lewis Walters is a Virgin Islander who has accumulated years of experience at the management level of the civil service. She served for 20 plus years as a senior government officer, first as director of the Public Library Service Department after the retirement of Miss Verna Penmal in 1990, and later as acting deputy secretary and acting permanent secretary. Ms. Lewis retired from government services in 2009 to take up a senior position at Lavity Stoutt Community College. She was the director of the Learning and Resource Center, the dean of workforce training, the director of the Virgin Islands Studies Institute. She is currently a part-time coordinator at the Virgin Islands Studies Institute. She is also an adjunct lecturer of the Virgin Islands History and Culture. Ms. Louis was appointed as a Constitutional Review Commissioner in 2022 and was honored to serve her country in that capacity. Her training is wide and varied. In addition to being an information and library science professional, her skills include a certified assessor of administrative and clerical training, certification in basic genealogy and family history research. She holds a certificate in public administration, certificate in e-government, both from the University of the West Indies. She holds 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's in business administration, and a master level certification in project management. We welcome Ms. Bernadine Lewis.
Good evening, everyone. I too recognize the protocol that has been established, and I especially say welcome to all of our distinguished guests, Honorable Premier in the audience in the front, and a distinguished visitor from the Bahamas. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. As we are going to explore a remarkable story of leadership, heritage, and community. And this presentation will focus on Long Look as a community rich in political leadership, a place whose influence on public life in the Virgin Islands far exceeds its small size, that is the community of Long Look. So when we examine the history of Long Look, we discover that its contribution to political leadership is not simply a matter of chance. Rather, it is a story woven through generations of families whose values of service, integrity, resilience, and civic responsibility have been passed from one generation to the next. Genealogy offers us a unique lens through which to understand this legacy. Family connections reveal how traditions of leadership, public service, education, and community involvement have endured over time. It helps us appreciate that many of the territory's political figures are linked not only by shared ideals, but also by shared ancestry, extended family networks, and deep roots within the Long Look community. May this presentation deepen our appreciation for the remarkable legacy of Long Look and inspire us to preserve the stories, the relationships, and history that continue to define this exceptional community. In Long Look, we find extended family connections that stretch across surnames, marriages, churches, schools, neighborhoods, and public service. These family networks have fostered a tradition in which each generation has inspired the next to serve. Now let us begin the journey through Long Look, a community rich in political leadership. We had a chart and we were hoping to show it on the screen, but we realized that it is extremely small, even though I think one of them was turned into a PDF, but our IT specialist informed us it probably will be too small to read. Now, Ron called the names, he preempted me, he called the names of the politicians that we have, quite a lot of them we found when we did the research, that they have that deep connection. We can trace them right back to what we call the Long Look Free People. And the names included, of course, and I won't put we know that they are all honorable men, so for now, please forgive me, I will leave out the honorable on each name, I'll just call the name. So we started out with the first to represent the community, that area, which was then District 4, Leslie Franklin Malone, and he was followed by Terrence B. Lettsome, Dr. Kedrick Pickering, and we also have Honorable Dr. Natalia Wheatley, Premier, so I give you an honorable. Dolores Lettsome, and she became Christopher. Kevin Malone, Vernon Malone, Lloyd Black, Marlon Penn, Alred Frett, Neville Smith, Conrad Maduro, and then from our nearby Virgin Islands, US Virgin Islands, we had Alicia Chucky Hansen. She was Nee Pickering and former Governor Charles Wesley Turnbull of the USVI. And as you have heard, they are all descendants of 4 women. Margaret Nottingham, who was the mother, and her 3 daughters, Dora, whose children were from the Potter clan. And we have Eve, whose descendants are the Rapsat clan, and Diana, whose descendants are the Pickering clan. And those 3 surnames are the original, what we call the original 2nd generation surnames, the Potters, the Rapsats, and the Pickerings. And the other names, of course, as they got married, you heard they are from women. The thing about us women, we get lost in these married names. And so someone asked not too long ago sometime, well, what happened to the surname Nottingham? They said, well, you know, it's there. It's just that when you look at the 25, these were, most of them who survived were the women. And those women are the ones who carried on the legacy of the Long Look Free People. The descendants came from those women, primarily. Now, what I was proposing to do was that we look at a chart. So I will start with these names. There are others, right? Just bear with me, because it was 3 charts. So I will start with chart 1 and look at the names that I called previously. So when we look at Margaret was the head matriarch, and we have her 3 daughters, Dora, Eve, and Diana. So from Dora, who was married to or mated with a Jack Potter, a free man who eventually was blind, she had William Potter. He had John Solomon Potter, who had Richard Mercer Potter, who had Dennis Potter. Dennis had Crystalita Potter Black, and that was Lloyd Black's mom. So Lloyd Black, that legislator, came from Dora, Nottingham. Dora's son William, John Solomon, Richard Master Potter, also had a son named Maurice Potter. He had Idalia, Miss Dally Potter, and she was a mom of Dolores Letsom. So there you have Dolores also coming from Dora, Nottingham. Dora and Jack, a daughter, Mimbo Potter. She had Edward Thomas, I know they like to call it Thomas, who had Petrusia Lady Feck Thomas, and she was married to a Fret, Joseph Feck Fret. They had Victoria, who had Henry Valack, who had Magda, and that is Malon Penn's mom. So Malon comes also from Dora, Nottingham. Now the chart is very wide and extensive, so I'm just trying not to get it mixed up. Then we have from Eve Nottingham, who is a daughter of Margaret. Eve was married to Jasper Rapsat, a free man from the Keys, Salt Island, Peter Island, Salt Island. They had Abraham, and he had Princess Amelia, and she had Mary. Mary had Francis Franco Letsom, the father of Terence B. Letsom. So Terence came from Eve, Nottingham. Princess Amelia Rapsat, she had John Timothy Fret, who had Alvanley Fret, who was the father of Alred Fret. So Alred also came from Eve, Nottingham. From Eve's granddaughter, Princess Amelia, right, she had Joseph Feck, or Joseph Christopher Fret, who had Victoria, Henry, Magda, and Malon. Now what we know too is that quite a few of them they are descended from two sisters. So Malon, for instance, you are descended from both Dora and Eve. And so some of the names are repeated. So Dolores' name is also repeated because we have here James Rapsat, Mary Louisa Henrietta Sproul, her son Ivan Fox Letsom, Dolores Letsom. So Dolores not only came from Dora, she's also descended from Eve, according to our records here. From Diana Nottingham, who mated with Geoffrey. Geoffrey was a really testy fellow. You know, he came from the Josiah's Bay plantation, and they were very, rebellious and testy, and because Ron spoke about the fact that when he was being shipped off to Trinidad, and he had already started to have children with Diana, and he decided he ain't going nowhere. He didn't do anything. He's not leaving his family. And so she was able to work it out to buy his freedom. So Diana had with Geoffrey John Francis Pickering, who had Thomas Andrew Pickering, who had Alphagena Pickering, and Alphagena was the mom of Eldra Davies, who had Dr. Orlando Smith. So Orlando is from Diana Nottingham Pickering. Diana Nottingham, again, John Francis Pickering, Thomas Andrew Pickering, Alphagena Pickering had Dorothy Davies, and Dorothy had Douglas Wheatley, and you all know where I'm leading. Honorable Natalia Wheatley came from Diana Nottingham. Diana, John Francis Pickering, Thomas Andrew Pickering, Alphagena Una had Dancia Penn and Andre Penn. So they are also descended from Diana Nottingham. And that is also the Senator Alicia Chucky Hanson's line. Thomas Andrew had Joseph Pickering, we used to call him brother. He had Maltine Pickering, who had Alicia Chucky Pickering Hanson. Under the same Diana, she looked like she had most of these politicians. in the BVI. She had John Francis Pickering, Thomas Andrew Pickering, Clarita Pickering, who had Leslie Malone. She also had Gad Malone, who had Medita Malone, who had Natalia Wheatley. So from that, he's descended twice from Diana Nottingham. Clarita, who was under Diana Nottingham and John Francis and Thomas Andrew, had Flossie Malone, who had Ephraim Penn, who had Marlon Penn. Marlon, you appearing there too often, you know. Are you here? And then we had, under the same Diana, John Francis Pickering, Thomas Andrew Pickering, Clarita Pickering, Ruth Malone, who had Kevin Malone. I also want to go to my chart 3. What we need to understand was that the history of Long Look is also closely connected through family names that migrated into Long Look in those early years, prior to the 1834 emancipation and shortly after emancipation, many of them being descendants of formerly enslaved Africans who remained on the island and joined thriving communities such as Long Look. Among the families that became as closely associated with the development of Long Look through these early migrants who assimilated into the community through marriage or being born in Long Look in those early years and would be part of that Long Look free people were the surnames Thomas, or Thomas, Lettsome, Stoutt, Gordon, Fret, and the Skelton families, also Stevens. Added to the previous list of legislators that we just talked about, therefore we have, and I showed a line of some of them already, Dr. Orlando Smith, Dancer and Andre Penn, Omar Hodge, Hubert O'Neill, Luce Hodge Smith, Alvaro Maduro Keynes, Walwyn Bruley, and Eileene L. Parsons, Nee Stevens. Now tell me, is not the whole of the legislature in the BVI? Okay, there you go. So Long Look may come from. A close look at the family trees and will show that many of these leaders are connected, sometimes by blood, sometimes by marriage, but always by community, the community of the Long Look free people who have helped shape the political, social, educational, and spiritual life of the Virgin Islands. Long Look's story is also rooted in resilience. As one of the earliest free Black communities in the Western Hemisphere and the first in the Virgin Islands in terms of free Black community, he talked about Jos van Dyke, but like he pointed out, Jos van Dyke did not, the folks who were freed in Jos van Dyke in 1767 did not stay in Jos van Dyke as a community, together as a community. So Long Look's history fostered independence, self-determination, and community responsibility, qualities that have echoed through successful generations of leaders. This presentation is therefore about much more than politics. It's about heritage. It is about families. It is about the transmission of values across generations. And it is about understanding how one small community become one of the territory's greatest nurseries of political leadership. As we develop additional genealogical connections to share in other forums, may we gain a deeper appreciation not only for the individuals who serve as our territory's legislators, but also for the families and community that helped shape them. Their legacy reminds us that leadership is not simply inherited. It is cultivated, encouraged, and sustained through generations. Today, many residents of Long Look can trace their ancestry to these founding families. Those early migrating families also remain an integral part of Long Look's historical narrative, representing generations whose perseverance and contributions laid a foundation for the community that exists today. Thank you for listening to this presentation, Long Look, a community rich in political leadership. Thank you.
Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. That's quite a bit of research. Quite a bit of research. Outstanding work. Our final presenter, Dr. Catherine Smith. Long look as a cultural landscape. Huh? So we got all of it covered tonight. Dr. Catherine A. Smith was born on the island of Tortola in the Virgin Islands. She received her PhD in history from Howard University in 2009. Dr. Smith also received postgraduate certificates from University of the West Indies in teaching in 2012 and from the Harvard University Extension School in Museum Studies in 2021. She is currently completing a professional certification in collections management through the Northern Conservation State Center. Dr. Smith has worked as a lecturer and a senior lecturer in the Department of Humanities, Social Sciences, Communications, and later as Deputy Director and Acting Director of the Virgin Islands Studies Institute at H.L. Stoutt Community College. She's currently the Director of Culture. Dr. Smith also served on the boards of various nonprofit organizations and on national committees related to the matter of culture and heritage. Between 2014 and 2018, Dr. Smith provided leadership and oversight through a nonprofit initiative entitled Association for the Preservation of Virgin Islands Culture and Heritage for the implementation of all aspects and phases of the African Burial Ground Restoration Project at St. Philip's Anglican Church. Dr. Smith is also a long-standing member of the Executive Board of the Territory's African Studies Club. Welcome, Dr. Catherine Smith.
Good evening again, everyone. Okay, my presentation is titled Long Look as a Cultural Landscape, Applying the Criteria for the Declaration of Cultural Landscapes to Long Look. My presentation is going to be very visual. Can you see something on the screen? Okay. Now, we do have legislation in the Virgin Islands that would allow us to basically develop or roll out a program like this, even though I'm going to be using the criteria for organizations like the National Park Service in the United States. According to our National Parks Act, the National Parks Trust functions include identifying, monitoring, and advising the minister on historic buildings or places that may need special protection through declaration as historic sites and assisting with their conservation and restoration. Also, important natural and cultural heritage features such as landform types, landscapes, historic sites are included in the Protected Area System Plan. This is found in the National Parks Act of 2006. The classification for parks and other protected areas include a natural monument, which is a unique area of land or sea containing one or more natural and associated cultural features of outstanding value, a protected landscape or seascape, which is an area of land or sea where the interaction of people and nature over time has produced a distinctive character with significant aesthetic, ecological, or cultural heritage value, and an area classified as historic site, which shall be an area of national importance for its historic and cultural values and not otherwise associated with a natural site. Now, I'm going to actually use, as I mentioned, some of the criteria that the National Park Service, just to imagine that we would develop a program like this, to declare their cultural landscapes. Now, the National Park Service in the United States, it recognizes 4 cultural landscape categories: historic designed landscapes, historic vernacular landscapes, historic sites, and ethnographic landscapes. I'm going to be talking about the category of historic sites. Now, in their criteria, the National Park Service says that for the historic site to be declared as a cultural landscape, it must be a property that is associated with significant persons, individuals who have made contributions or played a role that can be justified as significant within a defined area of US history. But if we were going to apply that, we would say Virgin Islands history. So what you would see is, let's say you had a famous artist that had a great impact on their culture and art. And the artist had a home. This would be declared as cultural landscape, and everything would be preserved there, from the garden to the artwork to the studio, everything. And then everyone would visit. This would be one of their cultural landscapes declared by the National Park Service. But the National Park Service also makes it possible for groups of people, neighborhoods or citizens, a group of citizens that have such an impact on American history. And for our purposes here, we will be looking at the Long Look Free People, right? So under criterion A, when it's difficult to pinpoint the specific significance that I'm speaking about here, what happens is then there's the development. What they look at basically is a broad pattern of community development by having evolved historically into a neighborhood where these citizens that resided there had this impact. So it's more about the impact of a group of citizens. And so in this case, we'd be looking at the Long Look Free People. And so they do have a category that applies particularly for a community of people. And that's not to say that we wouldn't necessarily extract significant persons, because certainly there would be significant persons in the history of Long Look and descended from the Long Look Free People. We've heard quite a bit about this evening. Can everyone see the map there? Okay, so this is our famous 1798 plantation map. I'm hoping that it's big enough for everyone to see, because let's kind of look at what we're talking about. If you look over on the east, and you'll see Beef Island kind of touching the east, and look down. I hope you can follow, and you'll see the bay, Fat Hogs Bay. If you're able to see that, and then go in, tab in 2 properties. And the second one that you see there is the Long Look Estate, as Ron was talking about, the cotton plantation. So that would be before the Long Look Free People transitioned it into the village. This is what we're talking about. And I want to make a quick note that if you look at that map, which we use a lot, you would notice that that plantation is the only one without a name or number. So just fix this in your mind, that this is a typical plantation map of the Caribbean, 1798, European planters. And there's one on this particular plantation map in the Caribbean, in the Virgin Islands, that has a plantation that's being managed and run by free Black persons. Would they want to name that or number that? We could speculate about the reasons, but it certainly is very, very interesting that that's the case. If you look at the other, I just included this one because it's a close-up. And if you can see, I'm not sure that you can see, but this is Ron's handwriting. And so the area called, it's Long Look, and hopefully you can see, as I was mentioning, that it's the second one in. So if you look at that map, that is exactly where the cotton plantation. Now the boundaries obviously would have changed, and what we would need to do is we would need to demarcate and explain clearly how those boundaries shifted from the transition from the estate to the village. I'm going to begin to talk about some of the criteria that would be applicable to Long Look. One of the criteria says a religious property. This is the criteria you must meet to be declared cultural landscape, for example, in the US. A religious property deriving primary significance from architectural or artistic distinction or historical importance. Of course, I put the church there. We no longer see the prayer house that was present before the church in the early history, the Methodist prayer house. But I'm told that we have pictures of that, and pictures also become important in a process like this. Also, you're fully aware now that the murals below tell the history of the Long Look Methodist Church, and those are important as well. If you can see the other slide, you can see the Wall of Fame. Remember I mentioned before that we're looking at this holistically, the Long Look Free people as a group, but it's also possible to look at individuals because there have been individuals named. Some of the names are right here on the Wall of Fame, and the applicable criteria that we're looking at would be you would have in the area a birthplace or grave of a historical figure of outstanding importance if there is no other appropriate site or building directly associated with his or her productive life. So any of those individuals, if there's any kind of structure, the home that they were born in, whether they were buried in a burial ground, someplace that they gave their life's work to, where they contributed to the community, that place then, under the program at the National Park Service, would then be declared as a cultural landscape. The next map we're going to look at, the next criteria we're actually going to look at, I hope you can see it there. I'm going to take the example of Honorable T.B. Lettsome. Why am I using that example? I'm using that example because I can easily do that, because as you can see in the image, not only is he on the Wall of Fame, but we literally have an international airport named after him. So I can easily use that example that could be used for this criteria. I can also use that example because you can see right next to the signage for the international airport, the burial ground where he's buried. So if there is one area that would be declared as a cultural landscape, it would be this burial ground. I understand this is the Lettsome family burial ground, right? And what's also outstanding to me is that I put these all side by side because the very same stonework that was used to create the burial ground is a very similar and very same style of stonework used to put the signage at the airport, which is named after him. And I think that's just outstanding, right? So this criteria says a cemetery which derives its primary significance from graves of persons or of transcendent importance, from distinctive design features, or from association with historic events. Okay? The next slide, applicable criteria. I just included this one because I'm so amazed that we actually have this beautiful. I just wanted you to see a little bit, which you do see there passing every day, but pause and look at it. It's very unique in its design. You can see the cemetery. It's the only one with names on it, and then you can see the seating on both sides, and there are other seatings around it. But it's just very interesting. Hyacinth, the resting place of Hyacinth Leona Lettsome Crab, Ms. Luna, and she was born in 1926. Are you seeing the slide? Can you go back? I hope you can see. You can't see the dates, I don't think. Okay. And can you see the dates? Because she's resting with her father, John Alexander Lettsome Ellick. And he was born in 1882. And this grave exists right there in that cemetery. Are you able to see it on the screen? Beautiful, isn't it? Okay, we can go forward now. I put this I put this slide here just to, it gives you additional information. This is the work of Ron Potter and Bernadine Louis. We would have gotten information about the Lettsome land and its donation from the Lettsome family, which links to the fact that this is the Lettsome family burial ground. Another criteria, very interesting criteria. A reconstructed building can be named as a cultural landscape when it accurately executes in a suitable environment and presented in a dignified manner as part of a restoration master plan, and when no other building or structure with the same association has survived. I hope everybody recognizes this. So this would be the project of Real Fret, otherwise known as Limping Jack. And he has, for many years now, it's right there in Josiah's Bay, reconstructed, I guess he calls it the yard, in Long Look. So there you are able to see the setup. You're able to see the kitchen first. You're then able to see the house with the living room and also the bedroom side by side. I'm not to say living room, it was called the hall. And last of all, you can see the bathroom, which has the toilet and the shower, right? I just want you to, go into your imagination and imagine a structure like this, reconstructed, very beautiful, and of course all the artifacts are in there. He's, making plans to put the brick oven outside, and etc. And you literally are transported back into that time period, which can happen, right? And these sorts of reconstructions are named as cultural landscapes by the National Park Service when they no longer exist. So you can reconstruct it. I'm just showing the structures individually in this other slide. And in the next slide, I just kind of zeroed in on the windows because the details are important. You can see the vent for the bathroom. You can see how the kitchen window lifts up, the shutters for the bedroom, right? Artistic reconstructions are also important. And so with the artistic reconstruction, and these were commissioned, and I think Ron worked with the artists, with Lute Durant from Long Look. And you can follow the history there. We should know that first there were the thatch houses, going into the wooden houses and the concrete houses. So these are things that, people come to see and are very interested in seeing. And if you go to the next slide, You can see a little bit of the thatch houses. And we'll finish up there on this with the last slide. And if we should be on the slide with Ruben Vanterpool as the artist and looking at the village. Were you wondering what the village looked like? Here's an artistic reconstruction in all of the presentations that were being made, right? It becomes visible there. And we're going to reach to this very interesting criteria here. We should be seeing this ticket on the screen. A property, primarily, these are also cultural landscapes. Commemorative in intent, if design, age, tradition, or symbolic value has invested it with its own historical significance. Right? So at this point, if you're going to see the other slides, I want you to take a quick look at the columns and then look at the height of the roof. And it is designed this way for a purpose. And I do just want to thank Real Fred for interviewing his interview. And also here, I need to thank the architect for her interview, Eileene Potter, because we have some information about this ticket, which tells us how symbolic and historically significant that it is. So it was commissioned by the 7th District Representative, Dr. Kedrick Pickering, and the architect was Eileene Potter. Now, we all would know by now that the area was always the meeting place for the community. There was a tree there, and we know this by now, where notices were stuck so that everyone knew what was going on in the village. The ticket was meant to honor the location and its history and its historical significance. It was meant to be the focal point of the community. It was designed to be celebratory and imposing. It was actually designed to be an imposing structure. The trunks were designed, the columns were designed like the trunk of the tree. The tree apparently was very imposing and gave shelter. So it was designed to give them shade, to be open to give them shade. And then you see the columns were reflective of the trunks of the tree. And then the roof was pitched so high so that feeling of grandeur was there as well, right? So it was designed with a deliberate intent, and it was designed to be symbolic and historic. And in the National Park Service, something like this, which is a symbolic structure, if it has that meaning and that intent in its design, would be declared as a cultural landscape. I'm going to switch up here for a minute, and now we're going to talk a little bit about artifacts. This is another important thing when we're looking at this sort of program. You should recognize the artifacts I hope that you're seeing there. Who do they belong to? Yes. So he let me take a few pictures. He keeps his artifacts well. And so you can see the calabash there. You can see the sea fan. This is another thing that should come through in this sort of program. It's the character of the life of Longloockians, and I think the rest of the Virgin Islands, which was to follow, which is that this real, what you could see as living with nature, in tandem with nature. Here's a sea fan. They used it to sit flour. Everything was, from many examples, you see the calabash there. It's just this complete kind of living with nature and living peacefully with nature. I saw something that was very decorative there. It's not quite a sea fan. And so what you would do is go and get those and use them for decoration. There are just so many examples. I put the kettle there because it was so big. And these other things we're very familiar with, the goose iron, the washboard, and the iron pot, right? I'm going to finish here with a note about the importance of conservation. If it was possible to develop a program like this, where we looked at, reconstructions, artifacts, etc., we have to have both preservation and restoration philosophies. We have to develop preventive conservation efforts and also carry out restoration efforts when something has gone so far that you have to bring it back. We have to integrate appropriate storage, conservation, and preservation procedures in the storage and the display, for example, of artifacts. Most of all, if we're going to develop these things, we have to guard against what are called the 10 agents of deterioration. They hit collections hard all around the world. Something like physical forces. For example, you can have an artifact collection here, and there's traffic outside. That's a physical force, a vibration. But you can secure in display and storage those artifacts in a way that mitigates that impact. And then we could talk about earthquakes and hurricanes and your disaster planning. Some of the other agents of deterioration include threat from theft, fire, water, pests, all over the world. And that includes mold and very harmful environmental conditions, such as pollutants, light, temperature, and the wrong level of relative humidity. We know that we have a generally warm and humid climate, and we absolutely should be controlling the environmental conditions. We also need to be mindful of the last categorization, which is dissociation, and that's when you don't document. So we really have to put an emphasis on documenting thoroughly. We have to, for example, create inventories. We have to maintain accurate catalogs and records regarding artifacts, including condition assessments. We have to implement proper collections management policies, principles, and procedures regarding all of the things that are happening around the world: acquisitions, accessioning, loans, use and access, ethics, security, right? So it becomes very important to also mitigates against deterioration through loss of identity, because objects can lose their significance if they become disconnected from the contextual information. And thank you.
Great stuff. And so at this point of the lecture, we're going to see if we can probe a little more into some of the things that they probably left on the cutting floor and maybe have some questions. And I know you guys are probably anxious to ask your questions, so I don't think that I'm going to delay it any further. I'm going to probably ask one or two questions, and then I'm going to let you guys have your go. It's quite a bit of research that has been done. What has been the most profound things that you have discovered from your perspective while you were doing the research? It's a question for all three of you. The thing that impacted you the most.
Thanks. Thanks for that question, Troy. In terms of the things that impacted me the most, simply put, in terms of just finding new information, because when I started the research, and I asked about Long Look, two things usually come back to you, which is Samuel Nottingham drafted the 1776 Manumission document, and he freed our ancestors, and then two, Christopher Fleming, the bad man, chased the governor out of Tortola into St. Thomas. And that, it seems, in terms of the history of Long Look, does just seem to be prevalent. And as I got into the research, and I got into the research from genealogy, as opposed to doing the specific research. And then doing the genealogy and added on to that, because what I needed to understand in terms of to understand my ancestors, I needed to understand the times and the conditions and the places in which they lived. And as such, then that expanded it a bit. And as you get in and you get the opportunity to do the research and the information in your understanding starts to broaden, then you get more appreciative. And the thing that really struck home to me is that it was right there in front of us, and we never brought it out. We never took advantage of it or used it to our benefit in terms of. It says in the manumission document, and all of us have a copy or seen the manumission document in some form or fashion, because I know it's included in the Vernon Pickering's book, Early History of the British Virgin Islands, Emancipation to, Columbus to Emancipation. There's this sentence that says that, we paid £5. But there's no value that been added to that. What it says now is interpreted from somebody else's perspective, that we were given our freedom, which says one thing, that we are passive in the process. But when we look at it differently, and it said that we were active participants in our own freedom, that says so much more about us, because then if we were active participants, how did that come about? And and you then you start to understand your ancestors a bit more, and you appreciate them for what they were in the times that they lived. Because to say that you purchased your own freedom, then in order to purchase your own freedom, you have to have the money to purchase your own freedom. You have to have the opportunity to purchase your own freedom. You have to have the ability to negotiate to purchase your own freedom. And that continues to say more and more about our ancestors. And then you look at other things and other documents that are available, that when they're interpreted, they're always interpreted from, say, the planter perspective or the European perspective. And the other document that I look at, when I first read it, I didn't appreciate it at first, but again, continue to reread it, is the 1782 letter from Samuel Nottingham and Mary Nottingham to George. And when this letter is interpreted from the European or the planter perspective, what it says is that it's a letter of Christianly advice from Samuel Nottingham to the free people. But then when you look at it, the letter starts off that Samuel Nottingham is responding to a letter that George Nottingham wrote him in the first place. That struck home. Well, in order for him to respond to a letter that George Nottingham wrote in the first place, that means George Nottingham could write, he could read, he could understand. And then that lends a different perspective in terms of us looking at our ancestors, because when we have this view, this vision that enslaved person, they're ignorant, nothing, they don't have, at least ignorant in certain matters, I should say. They don't have anything of worth per se because they're enslaved, they don't have any assets. Seeing that information sitting there in front of us, but we are not understanding and appreciating that, that sort of thing in terms of as you get into the research and you start to appreciate it, it becomes more the role of women. I'm really passionate in understanding the role of the women in the role of the free people, and in terms of how they were able to help and nurture and develop, the community that ultimately that has been passed on to us. So for me, in terms of the best part of the research is really acquiring this new knowledge to understand our ancestors from a different perspective than what has been portrayed. Okay. That's, for me, has been the most rewarding part of it, yes.
Okay. All right, Ms. Bonadine, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yes, the research has certainly been very challenging, very involved, and I was really, really surprised and pleased at the same time to see how much history we have in this territory. And also to learn that Long Look itself as a community has so much history that we were able to bring that out, not just in this forum tonight, but in the activities that we have been having, and that this history needs to be written down for future generations. It needs to be documented. I mean, a lot of it is oral history. Again, we were able to answer the question, can anything good come out of Long Look? And obviously, you know, that answer is definitely in the positive. And I just want to add to what I said when I was at the podium, because unfortunately I did not have chat 3. We have a lot of legislators who came out of Long Look, and there are still 2 more. That's Honorable Ronnie Skelton, and there's also Honorable Dr. Pickering, Kedrick Pickering. So those 2, you know, would be on the list, and they are part of the migrant persons that came in, intermarry into the community, and they would have also been, you know, their roots started at Long Look as well. But you not just only have legislators, there are a lot of persons, skilled persons that in that community, a lot of straw work, a lot of educators came from there, certainly the health field, and boat captains. I mean, there's so much talent and so many people that are associated with that community. It's something that, you know, we all should be proud of. And you have, of course, most of the persons, almost all of the persons on the committee, they are persons who are descended from Long Look. The 3 of us are. You have 2 Potters here, and Pickering, and also yourself, you know, that are also from out of Long Look. So it really was a really heartening and worthwhile exercise for me. And certainly it's the research and so on shall continue.
Okay. Final question, and then we get to the audience. I know they've been waiting. Kathy?
I would say that something that stood out for me the most was the efforts of current-day Virgin Islanders in preserving their own heritage. So you would have 2 representatives, both the current district representative who commissioned one of the murals, the other one the other, and also commissioned a structure that is so symbolic. You have real threat of reconstruction, artifacts. I'm sure there are other persons who have artifacts in the community. You know, look at the cemetery. It is so well kept. I just think that really stood out for me. T.B. Lettsam, you know, it just really stood out for me, and I don't know if it was on purpose, but the design at the airport, and then where his resting place, and the similarities between the 2. That is synergy there. The other thing that stood out for me, and here I would thank Perlene Scatliff-Leonard for introducing me to and having me interview the 2 bone setters. Yes, rubbers. Yes, and it was awesome talking with them. It was great. What really surprises me is that things like the straw work of persons like Adina Penn and all the others, because I'm understanding it, really produced a livelihood. It just surprises me that things like the sea fans are not in homes. That it's just a beautiful life, a beautiful way of living. It surprises me that I think there were only 2. They said setters left. I'm not sure where the midwives. It surprises me that all of I do think we use our medicinal teas, yes. But it just surprises me that so many of these things, it was a very beautiful lifestyle, are not as prevalent as they could be. And that is a surprise because of the value there.
Okay. All right, excellent. So the turn of the audience now, would definitely like to have the first question. I think you have to journey across to the mic a quick second. I think, my brother, you have your hands up. Just come across. And any of you who would like to have a couple of questions, raise your hands just so I can get an idea how much persons are interested in asking questions. And okay, great.
Good evening to the entire panel. My question is, when the persons were taken from Africa to be enslaved in the Caribbean and in the Western world, that there were certain things that they were allowed to bring with them. Two of those things were the ram's horn and a conch shell to be able to keep in touch with their neighbors and so on and so forth on the various estates. In your various research, have you found any such artifacts in the community of Longlook or anywhere in the Virgin Islands? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I haven't found, let's say, a conch shell that I could say date back. Let me rephrase that. Of course, we know in Anegada, we have the conch shells. Some of them date back to the fishermen that put them there about 100 years ago, but some date back to the First Nations. I know we're not speaking about Africa, but some date back to the Amerindians, the First Nations. They're the very faded white ones. But I do want to say that in the records, I've seen references to the conch shell because we had an 1831 revolutionary conspiracy that had a lot of similarities with the Haitian Revolution, where everybody on Tortola enslaved were going to collectively free the island and create a free black state. Once they said, "Are we free yet?" and the answer was no, they had a keyword, which I won't repeat here, but when that keyword was said, all of the captors, the enslavers would be no longer existing or off the island. And then they would go to Haiti to learn, remember Haiti was a black state already, a free republic, to learn more about that. And they had chosen their leader, an enslaved person who was, the planters were so disappointed in him. He had such influence, and he chose to help his, help the other enslaved people. But when the conch shell blew at the Bruce Bay estate, that was to be the sign that the revolution was going to start. And so you have those kind of references throughout the historical record.
Before you answer, I just want to say something about the conch shell, in that it is a device to communicate. And so even today, you know, when we are selling fish, you know, they use the conch shell to indicate, you know, that they have fish for sale. Another, in the research, another part that the conch shell plays is that for persons of African descent, it marks the grave sites of the Africans. You know, a lot of times long ago, we buried our loved ones in graves, you know, close to our homes or in family plots. And you will see the difference between the colonizers' grave sites and those for the Africans. They would just be basically farm it up with dirt, and they would ring the grave with conch shells, and sometimes use plants like the lily plant, and you know, to keep the soil together. So a lot of times they would say, when you see a grave with the conch shell ring around it, that is very likely African's gravesite. But those are the two things that I know associated with conch shells and African ancestors and descendants.
Next question. See if your mic on. Mic on. Yeah, so I think he's just going to check it very quickly. I think for the recording, you might want it. All right, so let me ask another question while we're waiting for the audience. Is it one of their mics? Let's see.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentations tonight. Mr. Potter, I was very intrigued with Christopher Fleming. And you spoke about his sentence in Antigua. I think you said it was about 6 months. But you didn't tell us what happened after he served his sentence. Did he come back to Long Look, and how did he live?
Thanks for that question. So if anyone in, I guess, in recent times who represented a Long Look, it was Christopher Fleming. Like I said, he was a very prominent, very vocal leader within Long Look. And yes, he, all of the, I guess, the persons who marched to Rotown to reclaim the boat, 11 of the 12 were sent to Antigua in prison. He was there for 6 months, everybody there for 4 months or less. On the completion of all of their sentence, they returned to Long Look, and Christopher Fleming returned to Long Look, and he continued as is, because most of the major positions of the day, effectively, he occupied them. Because I know after he came back and during the late 1890s, early 1900s, he became a constable, and I think that was a position that was offered that, within the community, and it was a position of importance. And all of the various positions of importance, effectively, it seems like Christopher Fleming held them. So he was the first constable when that position was established or offered to, non-Europeans. He held that position within Long Look. So he came back to Long Look and he continued in a position of leadership until he passed. Like I said, he was married twice. His second wife was Victoria Penn, and a number of children that he had. He had 5 children with her, and one of the more, I guess, famous persons, one of his, in terms of his children, would have been Miss Dina Chris, and if you know Miss Dina Chris, and one of her daughters would be Miss S.B. Potter, Miss S.B. Thomas Potter, if you know Miss S.B. Again, who is also a very prominent and vocal member of the Long Look community. Was not so. Christopher Fleming returned home, continued in a position of leadership and prominence, and that's something that he seems like he passed on to his children and also been inherited by his grandchildren as well, because the other person I would also mention would be Dr. Irad Potter, who is the son of Miss S.B. Potter, grandson of Miss Dina Chris, and great-grandson of Christopher Fleming. So Christopher Fleming returned, continued in the position, and passed on, his leadership abilities to the next generation and the generation afterwards.
Next question.
Good evening. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate all the presenters. Quite a wealth of information, and of course the committee who continues to put on these celebrations. I want to make a couple of comments because there's a slight gap in the historical significance of what we are doing. It is easy to think that this history was known to us and it wasn't necessarily taught to us some way, somehow, somewhere. But it is important to put in context why we are even here. In 1986, we started an organization called the Eastern Long Look Action Committee, ELAC. Most of us had just come back from university, at the time, and some other people who had returned from the US. And by the way, Premier, your friend, the late Collinston George, was actually one of the founding members of ELAC. And if my memory serves me correct, Lois could correct me, he was the person who first recommended the name ELAC. And when we started having meetings, we used to meet just down the road in Miss Otis' place when Denzi Letsom had started a little bar and restaurant there. That's where we started having our first set of meetings. Coming out of those meetings and coming out of ELAC, we started having these community meetings and then started putting on lectures almost similar to what you're doing here this evening, but the lectures themselves were community-based. Out of those lectures, one of the persons that did a presentation for us was Dr. Michael O'Neill. And he was the one who enlightened us about the Josiah's Bay plantation and the revolution of the Josiah's Bay plantation and everything else that went on, because out of his own PhD work, he had done significant research. It was then, again, Lois could correct me if I'm wrong, because he's the only person here who was a member of ELAC at the time. Oh yeah, well, Irad came along, but he wasn't, he came along. He wasn't one of the original, I'm talking about original because those meetings were held down there at the time. It was then that we learned about this Dr. Frank McGlynn. His name came up in the presentation from Ron Potter, but that was when we learned about Dr. Frank McGlynn from the University of Pittsburgh, who had actually lived in the Long Look community and did the research for his PhD thesis on the Long Look Free people. And we then, through Dr. O'Neill, reached out and found Dr. McGlynn and got him to come back to the BVI. And he did, if I remember, he did 2 lectures for us that then enlightened us about this Long Look Free people. I was a medical doctor. I knew absolutely nothing about the Nottingham estate and the Long Look Free people. This is 1986. And it is out of that time in history that we started doing all of these work. The Fisherman Day that we now celebrate on the 1st of them came out of ELAC. We started in Josiah's Bay honoring. We had any number of events that honored senior people in the community. Washash and I actually did a significant amount of research by going around and speaking to the elders in the community, including Irad's, Dr. Potter's grandfather, his name again, Irad? Mr. Alfred. We did research with all of them, and we saved that work. We gave it to Teacher Jenny to preserve for the historical significance of it. And when I got involved in politics is when I started really delving into the whole research of the Long Look Free people. Washasha and myself did a lot of that background work, Lois and all of us, and then I built up that process and then started the whole. But I wanted to also say, Kathy, that the design of the work of the gazebo at Long Look, some of that work was initiated by Mr. Dunlop, Derek Dunlop. He gave good insight into town planning and how we could develop the whole Long Look community to make it look. It was some of his original ideas. Then Romney Penn, right, had a significant part, and he was my friend. He played a significant role in helping to concretize the ideas for what we could do. So what you see, the graveyard, the design of the graveyard, the other playground where just in front of Dr. Potter's grandmother, Miss Dina's place, where his uncle used to live. We bought that land through Archie Christian and what the company, Archie, what your company name again? Smith's Go. We bought that through them from Archie's father, Mr. Clarence Christian, because he had owned the property at the time and built the park at that time. So the whole Long Look project with all the historical details and all of that was a part of a major project. And that's where Ron Potter got involved. And he was one of the persons who did a lot of the research for the actual printing of the information on the plaques that we put in the thing. And I congratulate Ron because he then subsequently, as he's demonstrated, took up the mantle and really run with it and has now made it his life's work, basically. And I've learned tremendous amount from him with the research that he has done. So I just wanted to say that to put it into context so that otherwise we miss that part of the history of how this thing happened. I was a medical doctor, fully educated, and knew nothing about the history of Long Look Free people. And so we sit here this evening under the auspices of the Lavity Stoutt Community College. Mr. Stoutt started a comprehensive school in 1968 and made education his mantra. We are all educated people now based on his vision of education, and now we must tell the story like you all have done. But that gap in the historical detail, I think I needed to share tonight.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Pickering.
Moderator, if I could, I also want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Pickering, for the work that he's done. I know when he started the project and was continuing the project, I came and I introduced myself and I said, Dr. Pickering, I want to be involved in his project. He was a bit skeptical at first. I thought he was somewhat reluctant. He gave me a project to see if I could actually execute on it. He saw the passion. I got it done. And then ultimately, he got me more involved. And I thank him so very much for allowing me to, again, exercise my passion in terms of heritage and history. And Dr. Pickering, ultimately, all of what we are seeing now was basically based on the path that you blazed. So again, congratulations to you in doing that. And hopefully you're appreciating what we ultimately have been able to achieve, all of us, based on the path that you have blazed. Thank you, Dr. Pickering.
Okay, one question and then we'll go to the audience again. In your research, have you been aware of the global significance of the people of Long Look and the freed people of Long Look in particular? I know you expressed a little discussion about the forced freed people in the Western Hemisphere and the debate, but there had been at the time, especially as the discussions approached about whether to free slaves and abandon the whole concept of chattel slavery, the fear that the slave master would have had of freeing slaves, and whether it was something that they would entertain. They were concerned that these people might just all kill all of us, and we don't know that we could give them their freedom. And the Nottingham, the Quakers in particular, there was this debate back and forth whether we cannot continue with this type of oppressive behavior. And using the Long Look people as an example globally in London and several parts of the world, that if you freed slaves, they could exist without murdering all the slave masters and that type of behavior. Have you come across that in your
Thanks, Troy. Yes, so in the early 1800s, 1820s, one of the things that the British did in terms of the debate on abolition is what they did was they sent agents around the British Empire to look at free black communities within the British Empire and make an assessment of them. And the communities, if I recall correctly, that they looked at in the Virgin Islands were 3 communities. Long Look was one. The other 2 communities were Guana Island, where Edward Percival had freed his enslaved persons and given them, I think, 140 acres of land. And then Miriam Harrigan over in Great Camino freed her enslaved persons on her debt and gave them about 40 acres of land. And one of the processes they went through, again, they visited those communities, and it was the same individual, if I recall correctly, Daniel Fraser, and he provided an assessment of those communities. Unfortunately, from our perspective is that it was in a negative, that if they had continued as slaves, they would continued being enslaved, they would have produced more than being free communities. And that information ultimately was sent back. So the persons who looked at, again, the communities in the Virgin Islands had a negative assessment of them. And so, yes, the significance in terms of, unfortunately, the communities here were used as a poor example. Even though we weren't, they were used as a poor example in terms of what free black communities could look like. But what I would mention is that, in every bad is good, because in making that assessment of the free people, especially for Long Look, what they effectively did was actually make a census of the persons in Long Look at that point in time. So what they did is that they looked at the 1776 census, 1770 manumission document, and assessed all the persons in the 1776 document and what was the positions now. And of that, only, like I said, only 6 of the original 25 were alive at that time, and they were able to, again, list all of the children. And that document for us, again, is invaluable because the early records that we have, the earliest records that we have are the Methodist records from 1819. And so the details of that 1824 document that looked at us in a bad light, but effectively provided a census, that's where we were able to make the connection between the original 25, the generation in 1824, and up to the current time. So that's why when Bernadette stands up and said that this person is descended from Margaret Nottingham, or that person is descended from Eve, or whomever, that particular document that was used to paint us in a bad light proves so invaluable in terms of connecting us with the 25 and connecting us with the heritage. It helps us connect the past to the present. So to sum it all up, yes, Long Look played some role in the greater process, but then ultimately that process effectively became invaluable to us from that perspective, helping us to, again, connect to the original 25 up to the current generations.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. This question, my brother, come to the podium.
Good night. We were talking about the slave rebellions, right? So, where were the Long Look people during these slave rebellions? If we had slave rebellion going on, how come they wasn't a part of it, or were they a part of it? And other part, just a comment. I think we should have more of these forum, this kind of discussion. And like what Ms. Louis said, we need to get in a textbook. So Premier, you gotta try to get in a textbook. Yeah, but this is an eye opener for me. And I didn't realize that the Long Look people purchased their freedom. I thought it was given to them. So now that changed the whole mindset that he wasn't and everybody asking the question where they get the money from. So that even makes you think now, okay, so how the Virgin Islands was that people could have moved around and walk and get different kind of money. If you watch them slave movies, a slave is property, where he going to work like it changed your whole mindset and the concept of how slavery was in the Virgin Islands and how we were so different from the rest of the world. And why I always say we the most special people in the world because ain't got nobody like we. And our history proving this, it's just that we don't have it written down to prove that we ain't got nobody like us. We special. And if we don't know that, I know that for sure. Ain't got nobody like me. And this even making me even no more. It don't got nobody like me. So, okay, so go back to the question. We asked you the question about the slave rebellion, where the Langlo people was when they come to the slave rebellion. Because I don't understand.
Yeah, I understand.
If we have all them different rebellion, if we were just on the side sitting down, or we wasn't worrying about that.
I'm going to direct that question to Dr. Kathy. Kathy.
I've been informed I should start. Kathy, bad cleanup. So where were the Longlook Free people during slave rebellions? The Longlook Free people were building the community. So they were on the Longlook estate, doing the things that they needed to do in order to ensure that, they could survive. One of the things that would take into account is effectively, you talked about how did they earn their living. First of all, the Longlook estate was a cotton plantation, which the Longlook Free people, like I made mention, was able to continue for a 40-year period up from 1782 when they obtained the estate up until the 1820s. But the cotton season was only between September to December. So there was effectively 9 months of off-season to do other things. And in addition is that the main crop in the Virgin Islands at that time was sugar, and that's where the greatest demand would go to. So they didn't want to compete, i.e. the cotton planters wouldn't have competed with the sugar plantations, so they would have planted in the off-season for the sugar plantations. And if you look at it in reverse, so the off-season for the cotton plantation, the free people would have hired themselves out in a number of cases to the sugar plantations effectively to earn a living. And that is most likely where Diana Nottingham would have met Jeffrey Pickering, because he was enslaved on the Josiah's Bay plantation, which is effectively right next door to Longlook. And ultimately, the reason why Jeffrey Pickering was going to be shipped to Trinidad by Isaac Pickering is that because Isaac Pickering and his son were of the opinion that Jeffrey Pickering was one of the ringleaders in all of the various rebellions and riots that were happening at the Josiah's Bay plantation. So effectively, they wanted to get rid of him. And so that's the reason why I'm speculating that's the reason why Diana Nottingham effectively had to go through an intermediary in order to purchase Jeffrey, because would Isaac Pickering effectively want to, I guess from his perspective, reward Jeffrey Pickering by letting him go after you cause all these rebellions on my plantation. I'm going to send you up to Longlook so you could be nearby to cause more trouble. And so most likely, that's why Diana went through an intermediary, and that was Catherine Fraser, who did that, who was an intermediary in purchases a number of enslaved persons and selling them on. So Diana purchased Jeffrey, and effectively he was then able to come up to the Longlook estate. So during that period when you had the various rebellions, Longlook was there. Longlook was, again, the community of Longlook was building that community, doing the things that it needed in order to survive. And in addition, just by being there and doing the things, it became like a beacon of hope. And it then attracted other persons, free or otherwise, to Longlook. I know the people of Longlook had relations with various individuals, both free and enslaved. Bernie talked about Dora Nottingham, and she married Jack Potter. Before she married Jack Potter, she had children with enslaved individuals on the nearby Hodge plantations and what's not. So again, there was a lot of interaction between the free people and all of the other plantations, because again, that's how they reached out and ultimately earned a living in order to be able to, before they were manumitted, to be able to earn a living, because they would have then come to some understanding with The manager at that time that because, look, let us go out and earn a living. And if we go out and earn a living, then you don't have to feed us whilst not we can then feed ourselves. And then in doing that, they would have earned extra money, which you would then use in order to buy their freedom. Once they had their freedom, again, they would have escalated all of their efforts because they would have developed the skill sets to be able to run a cotton plantation. They would have had the experience of hiring themselves out to other plantations. They would have had the experience in terms of, because as enslaved persons, you had the provision grounds that you would have used to support yourself. And again, the excess from your provision grounds, you would have gone out to, and sell. So a number of other opportunities for them to get money, get experience, do the things they want to do. But their interactions and connections with the other estate would be, one, when they hire themselves out, and two, because of their free community, where once you get to that community, ultimately you have an opportunity to build a better life. They were a beacon of hope that attracted persons from the other plantations to come and be part of Long Look.
All right. See if I get it down.
Definitely want to add to that. Thank you, Ron, and just support what Ron said. Was it Frank McGinn that said that the ones at Josiah Bay were known, they were turbulent and hard to be ruled. That's a quote. He built probably a jail for them 3 times, and they broke it down every time. So I think Frank McGinn said that the existence of Long Look was a sort of a catalyst for that. I think he was suggesting that for that sort of rebelliousness that was not stopping. So it had that role as well, an inspiration. But I want to really comment on how did they get the money. So I think that in the history of the Virgin Islands, for example, sugar didn't take over the export over cotton until after 1750s. And so that meant, as Ron mentioned, that there's less work. Sugar is really the killer. So like when you have places like, say, Nevis and St. Kitts with 90% of their population on a sugar plantation, not here. So then they had more time to do other things. You see accounts of the enslaved population being sailors. Let me describe the situation. Throughout the entire history, you see the English planters begging the King of England to talk to the King of Spain because Virgin Islanders built boats in the middle of the night enslaved and sailed to Puerto Rico. It never ended. And they were begging for soldiers to just man the different bays. So it was that kind of environment. There was a sort of a neglect from England that also gave our ancestors, I wouldn't say freedom because they're enslaved still. The other thing is that they were taking over cotton plantations and selling the cotton to themselves until there was a law that the planters had to put in place to stop them from doing that. You see the environment? The other thing was Stoutt. There's a report that Ron refers to, Stoutt report. He was a doctor. He was actually tried because he bought a silver spoon from an enslaved person. That was like, they can't sell, goods like that. So they punished him. And then, so those are the type of things that were going on. I also remember a report in the early 1800s that if the enslaved person didn't bring their product, their provisions to the market at the Over Judges Plaza, nobody in this island would eat. And they got paid for that, right? From their provision grounds and whatnot. So they just pushed and pushed and pushed. Once they had that space to do it, they just took advantage of that, and they pushed. And my last point for that is, we also had a free black population. In 1815, the free blacks here had property valued 2/3 of what whites had here resident. 2/3 of what the whites had here. I'm not talking about in England where they had their property. I mean here on the island. So it really is a different kind of situation. We link ourselves with islands like that didn't have sugar, like Barbados, Cayman Islands, more like with those groups of islands, Bahamas.
Next question.
Just before we move on, to answer the other part of your question, Mr. George, yes, we have two publications that will come out shortly, a commemorative booklet and a coffee table book, which will be on the market very soon. And those publications will have very much of what we talked about tonight, and then some. We also have an exhibition in the Learning Resource Center that also has some of the history of Long Look, some of the persons who were significant, again, in different occupational areas in Long Look, in the Learning Resource Center. It will be there until Friday, and persons can come and look at it. And that was done by Armin Penn, who is also a member of the committee, one of the committees. Mr. Kedrick Malone, he is the head of the publication committee, but the researchers and writers, the three of us, Ron, Kathy, and myself, for those two publications. So look out for them. They will soon be on the market.
All right, so I think we have the next question next. Let me say one thing, because I am going to let her speak. So one of the things that I'm saying is that there's a number of books that we can use to, I know people sometimes want to find where you can find a lot of this research, where you can find a lot of the information, and there's a lot of dots that we can connect. And I'm probably going to go through a couple of books, but let me let the young lady speak, and then we're gonna proceed with the information.
Moderator, good evening. I'm really inspired by the comprehensive presentations. Thank you very much. My question is to Dr. Smith about the national landscaping. And you referenced the United States and the Virgin Islands. I'm asking if there would be a national criteria, and if in addition to those references that you spoke about, if there would be other things that may be added to a national criteria for the landscaping.
Thank you for that question. The cultural landscape, yes. What I could say is that there is a provision for this in legislation that we have. We have the National Parks Act, and that's what I led with. And so if we wanted to develop programs like that, we certainly could, because that foundation is already there.
Go ahead. Next question.
Thank you all so much for this presentation tonight. First, I want to make the comment that the British Virgin Islands history is truly a rich history that is known abroad. I have did my bachelor's in Puerto Rico, and did my graduate law studies in England, and those places I had to explain because of people asking me questions about the British Virgin Islands or rich history. And lectures like these empower us to be represented very well abroad. So I really appreciate this. So my two questions are, first, Troy alluded to the first questions. I wanted to know, do you have a compilation, a collection of local history books that you can recommend for us tonight, for us to take notes, so that we can know what local history books are currently on the market or in our libraries, that we can continue studying our history? And the next question is about activities. What activities exist now that someone like myself or anyone else in this audience can choose to be active in concerning continuing to help develop our culture and our history and be interactive in these type of activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Books that you could recommend? I can tell you straight off the bat, Jerry O'Neill has a very nice book which is called Life Notes. Life Notes from Jerry O'Neill. And I think Ron mentioned a few more in his presentation as well as Kathy. It's one of the things that those of us who want to pursue the information more aggressively are always looking for places where they can get more information.
Testing one, two. I can begin, and then of course Mrs. Louis can both can continue. So there are two classics. There's one called The History of the British Virgin Islands by Isaac Duncan. These are both published in 1975. You can find a lot of these right here at Virgin Islands Studies Institute, where Mrs. Louis is. The other one is The Virgin Islands Story by Noel Harrigan and Pearl Varlack. I love that one. I love that one. The Duncan one had research that was from abroad, which is good, it's scholarly, and so is the other one. But the one by Varlack and Harrigan talks about culture and society, and it uses sources from here. Both are very, very important. There's an interesting book that you could order, The Hanging of Arthur Hodge, the serial killer in our history. And so you could literally order that one, and that's a very interesting book to read. Ron referenced Vernon Pickering, legend. You definitely have to get a hold of his coffee table book, which is the early history of the BVI. And then he also has a short history too that you might find. If you can't find the books online, then you would just come to the Virgin Islands Studies Institute. I'm thinking, anyone can jump in here. Those are a few. One of my favorites is From the Field to the Legislature, A History of Women in the Virgin Islands. Love that. The writing, the research by Eugenia O'Neill. That is a great book to read. I'm going to let others join in now.
Thanks, Dr. Smith, for that information. Just in terms of my research on Long Look, and to some extent the Virgin Islands as a whole, the publications I found most useful were History of the British Virgin Islands, if I recall, Kathy, by Isaac Duncan, and The Virgin Islands Story by Harrigan and Varlack. I think both of these are out of print. I was able to get copies, very expensive copies, off of Amazon. I think it was like $200-300 each for each of them. But again, it was History of the Virgin Islands, so I paid the price in order to get it. So, Honorable Premier, if you could effectively buy the copyrights for these books, got them reprinted, because they provided so much invaluable information. Yeah, these law scholars came, studied the history and the heritage of the Virgin Islands, documented it. It's there and available, but we don't have access to it. That needs to be corrected. Also, as well, another publication that I won't call it a publication, but the dissertation by Dr. Angel Smith. It's unpublished, but you're able to get a copy off of the net. It's called Anatomy of a Slave Society, Virgin Islands between 1807 and I think 1864. Please, if you can get a copy of that, of his dissertation, wealth of information, very valuable. I've been pleading with Dr. Smith, if you can hear me, please have your publication, have your dissertation published, because the information that he provides in there gives a very good understanding, very good understanding of the Virgin Islands between that period of time. And it was him who, after I separately had seen the slave registers in terms of the purchase by Diana of Jeffrey, but he himself has it included in his dissertation, and he was the one who was able to explain it a bit further, a lot better than I could, in terms of, again, what the transaction entailed. So I'll repeat that again: Anatomy of a Slave Society, Virgin Island, the Virgin Islands between 1807 and 1864, by Dr. Angel Smith, and it's from the University of Hull, if you can get that. Separately, again, a lot of the research that I did was from a genealogical perspective, and looking at that, where I would have gotten my information from would have been looking at a lot of records, the Methodist records, the Anglicans, and the Civil Registry records. I know quite a bit of those are online. You can get them through Family Search. If you're interested, you have to set up accounts to be able to access that. So familysearch.org and ancestry.org, you're able to, again, get access to a wealth of underlying documents that tells a lot about our ancestors, current generations and our people, and from which you can then derive information about the BVI. So I'll quickly repeat: Isaac Ducan, History of the BVI; Harrigan and Valak, The Very Story; Anatomy of a Slave Society by Dr. Smith; and again, the Ancestry and Family Search websites.
I think we shouldn't forget Dr. Michael O'Neill, anthropologist, and a great read for the entirety of our history: slavery, smallholding, and tourism or society, and tourism, right? Dr. Michael O'Neill. He also wrote a great chapter in another book published, I think it was published, edited by someone out of St. Croix, about the Josiah's Bay Rebellion. You could probably get that one at the Virgin Islands Studies Institute. Let's not forget Dr. Patricia Turnbull, if you're interested in the other free village, Kingstown, and look for her book. Dr. Patricia Turnbull, If These Stones Could Talk. There are also some historians that have niche areas. The history of nursing, was that Nurse Benjamin? Norma Benjamin. The history of education, is that Dr. Charles Wheatley? I mean, we love to write. We love to research and write as Virgin Islanders. So those are two very good books, and we can't forget Andrea Flack's The Way We Were, if you really want to know about the way we were. And then her books too, her recent books, her interviews with elders, they have a lot of information. And so you can educate yourself by reading just these books we've mentioned here. Hope it's helpful. Have anything to add?
So yeah, so that's a lot, and then I call those the seminal works. That's literature that we use all the time and that we recommend. We also have what I call the grassroots publications, like one was mentioned, J.R. O'Neill. We have Ivan Dawson's book. We also have T.B. Lettsome did a book. And, you know, those are persons who lived the experience in the Virgin Islands. So they are also good publications or works to get a copy of. Some of them are out of print. You can get a copy of it and read them, and they will give you the real grassroots story of the history of these islands, you know, how we developed over time, political history, social history, which a lot of the social history is not written about. And so we have to continue to write and document our history. Here at the college, again, we are doing a series of oral history interviews, so that we can have that information again and have it documented, so that persons who want to continue to write about our history and culture, you can do so. They will have the information there to build upon and write these stories and have our history documented.
This is my last edition. If you want to read about Anegada Shirley Faulkner, if you could find that book. Marilyn Bass, she wrote about Fat Bass, Mrs. Medita Wheatley's sister. That is another wonderful book. What you call these, the grassroots, where they give the first-hand account, but it's also full of wonderful information. King Garden Bay, there was, King Garden Bay wrote a similar book about King Garden Bay. Do you? Reimer, Mrs. Ethelyn.
What's the name?
Ethelyn Reimer, yes.
May I add, in addition to the books that have been mentioned, that as our way of celebrating the new millennium was actually to record what was the history of the Virgin Islands from the very first time that mankind began to live here. We were able to put out 15 different books. They were distributed to all of our libraries. And it's very unfortunate that since then, we've only been able to find a set that was given to Old Government House Museum. But that record is there. Every aspect of life in the Virgin Islands was recorded in those 15 books. So, the Millennium Project.
Millennium Project.
It's the college here, their library had because I made sure that each library got copies of these books. But Old Government House Museum does have the set. We were able to rescue those after Hurricane Irma.
The 1949 March by Bernadine Louis.
And also, one of the things that Dr. Pickering said that really struck me was how much he did not know, even as a medical doctor. And I must tell you that it burdens me to hear the amount of our history that we ignore. When I got into broadcast television, looking for documentaries, films, and movies, because it was the new trend at the time. And where we are now, we've evolved more into the visual arts. It's on your phone now, and TikTok and on Netflix. And we have such a rich history, and it's so important that we digest it and understand it. And I give tremendous amount of credit to the team and the Premier for trying to get some of this history and the recognition done properly. But it has been a challenge over the years. My mother, who, Honorable Dolores Christopher, was very passionate about having this history, recording our history. We would do it in drama. You know, she had the Festival of Arts. We haven't been able to keep it going. And I don't know why we don't value it more. I mean, I understand it well, but there is so much to uncover in terms of the information. And one of the things that a young fellow asked a while ago about what the other slaves, what the free slaves were doing during the time of the rebellions. And a lot of it is that even the idea of having free slaves being around others who have been enslaved excites rebellion. It's the little word play that we use, I find, is very, very important, that we would call slave masters planters. We are sanitizing, we sanitize it so much that I don't know if we can really, you know, we have to really speak clearly on what is transpiring. Also, the people who are enslaved, it means that they were not dumb or stupid. It means that they were actually enslaved. To build an economy in the Western Hemisphere, the slave masters actively look for people who could walk, who could build and plant and build for them the things that they saw in Africa, build for them in the Western Hemisphere. And it is that context that we're missing, why sometimes we think that the slaves were either incompetent or they didn't know or were buffoons. A lot of that story and that labels have been put for us to don't look in that corner because those people didn't know anything. Don't even give them a voice, don't listen to them, don't talk about them at all and this is a lot of that stuff we have to get past and we have to get over so that we can get the rich history and the knowledge and the wisdom that the world needs so much at this point so that we can get it out there. So that's just something that I think is extremely important. Any more questions? Sorry, come to the mic, I can't hear you, please.
Just a friendly reminder, I also asked what activities are existing that persons of this audience can get involved in concerning long look, history, and continuing the culture, and BVI history and continuing the culture as a whole.
Anybody want to give that one and then we can probably wrap up?
Thank you for that question again. One of the things I mentioned is we would really like some assistance with our oral history project. And out of that information, then we can start to build, databases, as was mentioned, to capture the younger audience, to create some audio and visual material for them. So that's one of the things that we are looking at right now, because again, we talked about a lot of publications just now, but still there are a lot of elements that still are not written down. So we'll catch that through some oral history.
Another question? Contribution?
Good night. I also would like to add, like everyone else said, excellent presentation. And while I sat there, and while we have a lot of information here, it's just a comment, it's not a question. And it's something I would like for us to really follow up on, whether it's the college, from college to college, gathering information from outside of a territory about us. There's a lot of information I know for sure at King's College in the UK. They were able to, when the FCO, I understand, the department, FCDO, when they were cleaning out their libraries, they lodged all their information that they had about the territories, all the territories, at the King's College. And I was fortunate enough to visit the King's College while in secondment to the UK and see some of that information. So we need to come up with a plan to at least have access to that information. There was a book I remember, it was so fragile. You really had to take your time to turn the pages, how old it was. And it had a lot of information about us. So the college, I leave that up to Bernadine and her his Virgin Islands Studies group to really reach out to these institutions to work out something to get access to our information that's out there.
All right, thank you. Also, I just want to bring your attention to two I think is very important things that has transpired this year. There has been a vote at the United Nations to recognize chattel slavery as one of the greatest crimes against humanity. I don't know how much of you have been paying attention, but the majority of countries voted. It was won overwhelmingly in terms of support. I would mention that the United Kingdom abstained from that vote, and the United States voted no. So it's important to keep identifying that some of the perpetrators still won't allow or come to terms with. Maybe it's the financial implications that apply. The current Pope also gave an apology on behalf of the Roman Catholic Church. I think it was for the church's role in providing, what's the terminology? When you make it seem like God authorized it and the church authorized slavery, chattel slavery, especially for African people. And he apologized for that on behalf of the church. And so a lot of changes are happening and things are being, things are unfolding. So I'm just making a note of all of these things. And I think we're probably going to have maybe one more question before we wrap up, and then I'm going to ask the Honorable Premier to come up and say some words, and then we'll.
So not a question, but a comment that Ms. Luce kind of remind me of. Is I worked at the Register of the Supreme Court. I worked with 5 judges there. And during that period, one day I was just, going around the books of the registry, and I came across about 5 solid books that detailed land ownership from slavery days, soon after slavery, up until about 1950s. And I have wondered if those books survived Maria. So I am putting it out there that is something that the college historical team or whomever could look into, because that, in my opinion, they had an excellent BVI land ownership descendant history to look into. So at least call up the registrar of the Supreme Court and ask her to look in to see if those books survived Maria.
Thank you very much. It's truly a lot of information at our disposal. It's the possibility of an entirely new industry is really at our feet. At this time, I'm going to ask the Honorable Premier. I know he wasn't here at the beginning, but I would like to have him come and say a few words, and then we'll wrap up right after he's finished. Honorable Premier.
The faithful few who have remained, let's give our presenters a round of applause. Yes, I'm sure we have a few other persons as well who've been watching online as well, but I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed the information which was presented. I just want to say I concur with quite a lot of the statements which have been made about getting this history into the schools, getting it published. The booklet which will be forthcoming, tomorrow they're going to be printed, will provide a source of material that can be used at the college, the Virgin Islands Studies, the Jenny Wheatley Virgin Islands Studies program, our schools, our libraries. So this effort has resulted in something tangible that will assist us in our efforts to educate our population on this vital history. And we shouldn't take it for granted, the real impact of learning this type of information. It can change the trajectory of your life. It can change how you feel about yourself as an individual, and how you feel about your nation, and even how you feel about the future. Because, of course, as our presenters told us, there were many persons who hoped that the Long Look project would fail, who anticipated that it would fail, that a group of formerly enslaved persons could not form a community and survive. You know, even in the survival of the Long Look community, that is something to be prideful about. Because these persons did not go to college. You know, they were educated. They did not have formal education until, as Ron said, we had to set up the schools. You know, where did these persons get these skills to set up schools? How did they learn these trades? How did they start building boats, and how did they do all of these things to establish and have a functioning community coming out of enslavement? This is a source of great dignity and pride that we were able to establish a life for ourselves that have brought us to where we are today. It is a source of great pride for us, and it is something that we must teach our children. Because if they could do all of those things with the scarcity of structure and resources available to them, they actually had to establish that. How much more can we do with all of the resources and all of the structures and institutions that we have available to us? I mean, we have the internet, we have phones, we have information at our fingertips. You know, all we need now is the same kind of tenacity of spirit, the faith in God. You know, the character, the hard work, the principles taught to us and passed down by our elders and our foreparents. If we just maintain that, then, you know, we would be an unstoppable force, and we would not doubt where we could go as a people into the future. We would gain some cultural confidence. You know, so I'm hopeful that these celebrations have added to our efforts to have national pride, Long Look pride and national pride. I'm hopeful for that, and I believe that the time, the energy, and the money that we've invested in commemorating Long Look at 250 has been well worth it, and I want to express my gratitude, my endless appreciation to those who have been a part of the effort, those who are on stage. I want to recognize Bernadine Louis. Let's give Bernadine Louis a round of applause for leading the committee and all those who have been a part of it. You know, the concert was amazing. Parsons have called, you know, for that concert to be a annual event. You know, the whole commemoration to be an annual event. I think that's something we certainly should consider very strongly. But, you know, to be able to put some of those stories in a very palatable form in terms of using the arts, you know, I think is a genius concept to ensure that this history is consumed by the broader public and even further afield. And I want to congratulate Dr. Pickering, ELAC. I want to congratulate the Eastern and Long Look Heritage Society, the African Studies Club, you know, the Long Look Methodist Church, all of the various institutions which has been keeping that history alive and also investing in that project, that Long Look project, which is ongoing. And I remarked to Ron on Sunday at the opening ceremony that I want the government to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Eastern Longlook Heritage Society to really formalize the partnership on building, continuing to build that project. And I know Ron and the Eastern Longlook Heritage Society has been working on further designs for that project, and you can be assured that we will provide the financial support to be able to continue the project. Because of course it's a fantastic project. It's been going for a couple decades now, and there's more fantastic things to come from that project, and we can really use that as a form of education for our young people and also for heritage tourism. I think I've said enough now. Troy said brief remarks, but sometimes we politicians don't know what the word brief means. So anyway, let me say to you all, this has been a fantastic effort. I'm very proud of the effort that we've put forward with this commemoration, and we look forward to tomorrow for the final event of the commemoration, which was a gala for persons who received an invitation. I should also mention as well, I was cursed quite a lot on Tuesday for not having enough T-shirts available. We printed more T-shirts because there are a number of persons, especially persons who are descendants, who wanted to have T-shirts as mementos. So we printed some more T-shirts. So please leave them to those persons who did not get any T-shirts. And let persons know who really wanted to get a T-shirt as a memento that we have them available. Kamari has them right here this evening. And I believe he'll have them available for persons who want to get a T-shirt as a memento. And of course, we'll have about, I think it's about 300 booklets which will be printed tomorrow. And we're very much looking forward to that coffee table book as well. So thank you, Troy, for the opportunity to say a few words. And I want to again thank all of you who've come out this evening, those who viewed via the power of technology, and of course our presenters tonight. Let's give them again another round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Premier. And as we wrap up, I think I'm giving 2 bonus books. These are for a lot of the advanced researchers. There's a book called How Britain Underdeveloped the Caribbean by Sir Hilary Beckles. Great read. And there's another book called Bourgeoisie Radicals, The Bourgeoisie Radicals by Carol Anderson. Very interesting book, because one of the missing links that we have is how can countries who say that they believe in human rights and freedom still keep voting no when it comes to these things that they say that they represent. But this book explains that it is some of the persons behind the scenes from the NAACP, the E.D. Du Bois, and some of those persons who were working with the wife of Eleanor Roosevelt and President Roosevelt, who came up with this concept of live and let live, the freedom that we talk about at the United Nations. It is that same black culture that we see within the Longlook people, how they could build a community is what we are seeing across these countries. And some of the missing links are embedded in some of these places. So I'm just giving that just for a couple of bonus for some of the people who are trying to connect the dots. Again, I want to say it was a great evening. A lot of information was shared. And I want to thank the committee and the individuals, Mr. Potter and Ms. Louis and Ms. Smith. And with that, I say good evening. Good evening. Thank you very much.